She showed up like she was arriving to collect something she already owned, not something she was trying to steal. Standing at my gate with that stiff fake posture people use when they think their position makes them untouchable. Pointing at my cabin like it was a brochure photo and not the place I built with my own hands. The morning air still cold enough to sting my breath while she talked to a stranger in a suit as if she was leading him through a property tour that didn't belong to her. And before she even saw me, I already knew exactly what kind of person she was. Someone who mistakes confidence for authority. Someone who believes rules are only real when she's the one giving them. Someone who thinks intimidation is the same thing as ownership. And when I stepped onto the porch and said, "Can I help you?" she didn't flinch, didn't blink. Didn't even bother to turn her body toward me like I was the outsider on my own land. She just gestured toward my cabin and said, "This property is now on the market," like she was reading from a script where I had already lost. As if my existence was just an inconvenience getting in the way of the sale she had already decided would happen. And the suit beside her was nodding like the papers were already signed when not a single document had ever existed, as if his clipboard alone made him entitled to look through my fence. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd in the kind of way only arrogance can be absurd, the kind of arrogance that grows in people who have never been told no long enough to believe they can't hear it. And when I walked down toward the gate, she gave me a smile so polished and hollow it should have come with a price tag. The kind of smile that's not friendly. It's territorial, and she said, "Not anymore? The HOA has decided to sell it." Like divine authority had spoken, and she was merely the messenger of inevitability. Like ownership wasn't something rooted in title or law or sweat or time, but in whoever announced they were in charge first. And when I got close enough, I saw the lock, not mine, a brand new one, placed there like a signature carved into someone else's doorframe. A quiet declaration of theft disguised as procedure, and my jaw tightened, not with panic but with clarity. Because in that instant, I knew this was not confusion, not a clerical mistake, not a miscommunication. It was an attempted takeover. Brazen and intentional, and she wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to erase me, and erasing someone always starts by pretending they were never the owner in the first place. So instead of arguing, I just stared at her for a long second, memorizing the look of someone who doesn't realize consequences are approaching behind them, like a shadow they forgot to fear. And I said interesting because last I checked, the HOA doesn't own me or my land. But she didn't listen. She didn't hear. People like her don't hear anything that doesn't bend to them. She just whispered to the realtor, "Don't worry. He won't be here much longer." As if I were already inventory being cleared out. And the funny thing is, if she had pushed with paperwork, if she had tried to bluff with some nonsense legal jargon, if she had pretended there was a hearing or a missing signature or some bureaucratic wedge, maybe she could have dragged this into a headache, but arrogance beats strategy every time. And she showed her entire hand in the first 5 minutes. She believed she could enforce ownership by pretending she already had it, which works on people who fold, not on people who build fences that weren't installed for decoration. So instead of calling the sheriff immediately, I turned around, walked back to the shed. And she assumed retreat instead of calculation, because people like her don't know the difference between silence and strategy. And when I came back with my own chain, my own lock, and a sign I'd been saving for exactly the kind of day I always knew would come, not paranoia, preparation, she finally realized something was wrong. Not legally wrong, power balance wrong, because she had expected submission, and now she was facing ownership in its unmoving form. The kind of ownership backed not by noise but by certainty. And when I wrapped my chain through the gate in front of her, locking them out from me, her face cracked, not into fear, not yet, but into disbelief, because in her mind the confrontation was already over before I ever walked outside. And when I hung the red sign, "Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted," she snapped, "You can't do that." And I told her, "Watch me." And that was the exact second the dynamic flipped. The moment she realized she would now have to prove authority instead of just declare it. And people like her don't know how to operate when the burden shifts onto them. They only know how to bark orders downward. So she pulled out her phone and threatened security, like she was summoning law instead of cosplay muscle. And I leaned against the gate sipping my coffee like I had all the time in the world. because people who actually own land don't need to rush to defend it. They only need to expose the lie being staged on it. And while she dialed her little performance crew, I could see the realtor shrinking behind her, realizing slowly that he had stepped into something far messier than a listing. And the moment the SUV started rolling up the dirt road, I didn't have to see the badges to know they were fake. You can smell impersonation the way you smell cheap metal in the rain. No jurisdiction patch, no department identifier, just borrowed uniforms and Amazon confidence. And when the tall one said, "Sir, we're going to need you to open this gate," I had to stop myself from laughing because he was trying to sound official, using a voice that didn't belong to him. So I stepped closer and said, "I'm going to need you to tell me what law gives you the right to be here." And the silence that followed was the kind you can measure in inches. The kind that tells you someone expected obedience and just discovered resistance. And she tried to fill that silence with bluster again. "They have the authority," she said. Like repeating a claim could manufacture legitimacy, but I lowered my voice and told them exactly what ended this charade before it got loud. "I know real law enforcement. I trained them." And right there, in their eyes, you could see the performance fracture not collapse yet, but buckle. Because credibility is oxygen in intimidation. Once you puncture it, they suffocate. And Karen started barking again because her panic needed volume, snapping, "He's bluffing," just as the rumble of a real county patrol truck started coming up the road. She came to my gate like she was doing a property inspection on something she already owned, not like a trespasser caught mid-theft, standing there with the posture of a self-appointed queen, pointing at my cabin like she was rehearsing a sale pitch and not attempting a land grab. The man next to her in a cheap suit holding a clipboard like it was a deed, squinting through my fence like reality would rearrange itself if he stared hard enough. And the way she spoke before she even acknowledged me told me everything about her. She wasn't asking. She was informing. She believed ownership was something she could declare by tone instead of law, authority by posture instead of paperwork. And when I stepped onto my porch with a mug of coffee in my hand and asked, "Can I help you?" she didn't even have the decency to smile like she was caught doing something wrong, because in her mind, she wasn't. In her mind, I was the inconvenience, the obstacle, the thing to be removed before the real business continued, and she said, "This property is now on the market," as if she were narrating a brochure, like I was a spectator to my own displacement. And I could feel in the back of my throat that slow tightening that doesn't come from fear, but from disbelief. The kind you only feel when arrogance arrives dressed as procedure, when someone tries to confiscate what they couldn't earn. And I walked toward the gate slowly because I wanted to look her directly in the eyes when I said it. "This is my land." And she gave me the fakest, tightest little smile you reserve for toddlers and idiots, and said, "Not anymore," the way people talk when they've mistaken themselves for the law. And then I saw it. The lock. Not mine. A new one, placed there like a flag, like a declaration of conquest, like someone carving their name into another man's front door and calling it compliance. And the laugh that came out of my mouth wasn't humor. It was disbelief, sharpened into clarity. Because at that moment I knew this wasn't some clerical confusion, this wasn't a notice issue, this was a coordinated attempt to pry ownership away through intimidation and theater, the most dangerous weapon petty tyrants have always relied on. And she turned to the realtor like she expected applause for her performance, whispering, "Don't worry, he won't be here much longer," like I was an old furniture set waiting for removal. And that was the moment something inside me clicked into place. Not anger, not panic, just finality. The kind of finality that arrives when a line has been crossed so fully that the response is no longer emotional. It is structural, so I didn't shout, didn't negotiate, didn't ask. I just turned around and walked back to my shed while she tried to pretend the conversation was already over. Because people like her don't know the difference between silence and obedience, they assume both mean victory. And when I came back with my own chain and my own lock and a bright red sign that had been sitting in storage for a very particular kind of day, she finally realized there was another player on the board, not a resident, not a complainer, not a non-compliant homeowner, but an actual owner. The one thing HOA tyrants secretly fear because it is the one thing they can't manufacture by committee vote. And I wrapped my chain through the gate right in front of her, locking them out of my land the way she had tried to lock me out of my own home, and the way her jaw tightened told me she wasn't used to resistance. She was used to people folding, to people assuming she had paperwork because she said she did. And when I hung the sign, private property, trespassers will be prosecuted, she snapped. You can't do that. Not because she believed it, but because she needed the illusion to keep breathing, and I took a slow sip of my coffee and said, "Watch me." And she panicked the only way powerless authoritarians know how. She went to her phone, not to prove authority, but to summon it, barking into the line about security like she was calling an army instead of backup actors. And when the fake cops arrived, no department patch, no jurisdiction seal, just thrift store intimidation. The first one tried to project authority through tone alone, telling me, "Sir, we need you to open this gate." And I looked at him like a grown man looks at a Halloween costume and said, "And I need you to tell me what law gives you the right to be here." And they hesitated just long enough to reveal everything. And Karen tried again to bluff reality into existence by volume. They have the authority. But I stepped closer, lowered my voice, and ended their act in 7 words. I trained real law enforcement. You aren't it. And their eyes flicked sideways. The same look every impersonator gets when the mask stops working. And right then, the universe did me the courtesy of timing. The low rumble of a county patrol truck rolling up the road behind them. A real badge approaching, the kind you can't order off the internet. And she tried to reshape the narrative before anyone else could speak, pointing at me like an exhibit and saying I was illegally occupying the property, as if language alone could reverse ownership. But the sheriff didn't buy a second of it. Because real authority doesn't bark, real authority observes, and within 60 seconds he had already seen what she refused to admit. That she wasn't enforcing anything. She was attempting possession without title, jurisdiction, paperwork, or claim, just ego, and when he photographed the bogus lock and asked her, "Who authorized this?" she tried to hide behind abstractions like board decision because she couldn't produce a name, and when he asked, "Who signed the deed transfer?" she went silent because there was none, there never was. There had never been anything here except a plan to seize by intimidation what couldn't be seized by law. And the realtor wilted like a wet napkin once he realized the sheriff was documenting a crime scene and not mediating a dispute. And in that moment, you could see the entire psychology of HOA tyranny collapse, the illusion, the tone, the posture. Because when real law walks in, fake power evaporates. And that was when I understood something about people like her. They don't fear being wrong. They fear being seen being wrong. They don't fear justice, they fear exposure. They don't fear consequences, they fear a witness. And now she had one wearing a badge that didn't come from a shipping warehouse. She wasn't scared of the sheriff, not yet. She was scared of losing the illusion she had been performing for weeks, maybe months, behind closed HOA meetings. The kind where paper isn't signed, but power is assumed. The kind where corrupt people talk to each other so long they forget the outside world has laws they don't get to rewrite. And when the sheriff turned his attention to the 2 fake officers and asked for their badge numbers, you could see their confidence bleed out of them like a slow leak in a cheap tire. Because impersonation only works when no one calls your bluff. And he was calling it with paperwork precision, not aggression, not threats. Just procedure. The one thing fraud cannot withstand. And Karen kept trying to interrupt like volume could substitute for legitimacy, but the sheriff raised a single finger, just one. And the way she instantly fell quiet told me everything about her relationship with real power versus performed power. Because she didn't respect law, she feared it. And when he told the impersonators to place their IDs on the hood of his patrol vehicle, their hands shook not from guilt, from exposure. And the realtor, who had been puffed up earlier behind her fake confidence, now looked smaller than the dust on his own shoes, staring down at the clipboard like it could protect him from accountability. And the sheriff asked him point blank how he listed property without a signed deed transfer. No seller's authorization, no title reference, nothing but hearsay from a woman whose authority evaporated the moment a real badge arrived. And the realtor's voice broke the way a man's does when he realizes he just walked his career into a wood chipper, stammering about understanding and assumptions and board approval. And the sheriff shut that down with 6 words that landed harder than a threat. HOA approval isn't property ownership authority. And I saw Karen's face change, not expression, temperature. Because that was the moment she realized he wasn't just here to warn her. He was building a case under her feet while she still believed she could bluff her way through it. And she reached again for the only weapon she had ever used, intimidation disguised as certainty, snapping, "This is a private community issue." But the sheriff turned on her, not with anger, but with finality, and said, "Ma'am, trespassing with intent to seize property is not a community matter. It's criminal." And she took a half-step back, like the ground just shifted under her, because she had never expected the game to flip from control to crime, never expected to be treated like a perpetrator when she had lived her entire life behaving like an administrator of other people's boundaries. And he asked her for her board authorization, her claim filing, her deed reference, anything. Any document that showed even a hint of jurisdiction. And she couldn't produce a single sheet of paper because this was never about paperwork. It was about bullying, about coerced compliance, about hoping no one would push back hard enough to force her to produce something real. And when the sheriff told her she was now being questioned as a potential suspect instead of treated as a complaining party, her mouth opened but no sound came out, because entitlement doesn't know how to translate itself when stripped of microphone and stage. It collapses, wordless, shocked to feel limits. And the 2 fake officers were already crumbling under scrutiny, babbling inconsistencies while the sheriff radioed in a verification request for their supposed agency. And watching them try to keep their story straight was like watching cardboard pretend to be steel, flimsy, shaking, waiting to fold. And while all of that was happening, I just stood there quietly on my side of the gate, not yelling, not posturing, not even needing to speak, because ownership doesn't need to be loud when fraud is unraveling in daylight. And Karen kept glancing at me, like she was expecting me to rescue her credibility by arguing with her, like she needed the conflict to continue in order for her illusion to survive. But I denied her the stage by doing nothing except existing where she had tried to erase me, which was the one outcome she never accounted for. Me still here. Unmoved, unintimidated, untransferred, unowned, and slowly, you could see it set in behind her eyes. This wasn't slipping out of her grip. It had already fallen.